Today we speak with Michael Pröbsting, International Secretary of the Revolutionary Communist International Tendency, about the question of China. RCIT has the position that China has become an imperialist great power. Why do you think it is an imperialist great power?
I think that the issue of China as a great power, China as an emerging imperialist power, is one of the most important issues of the world situation today. In fact, what we have seen in the last few years is an enormous acceleration of the rivalry between great powers. If you do not consider China as an imperialist power, you cannot understand how this rivalry determines world politics. It's impossible to understand why the US, why Japan, why the European Union are putting such huge financial, political, military efforts in trying to expand their influence in Asia. China has become an imperialist great power, and this can be seen in a number of facts and developments. Just to give a few examples. Recently, a few months ago, a report was published about the super rich people, the billionaires in the world. And out of 1,877 billionaires around the world, 596 are from China, excluding Hong Kong, excluding Macau. China has become the home of the biggest number of billionaires. More billionaires are Chinese than American. There are less billionaires in the United States today than in China. China has expanded, it has become the second biggest economy. It has become the biggest industrial power, industrial producer. China has also, in terms of multinational corporations, China has now become the second biggest power behind the United States, but in front of Japan or Germany or other imperialist countries. China has become the biggest, one of the biggest foreign investors in many countries, in Africa, in Latin America. The renminbi, the Chinese currency, has become the fourth most important currency in international trade, more important than the Japanese yen. But it is not only an economic development; it is also reflected in various political developments. Just last year, China initiated the so-called Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is a kind of alternative to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And it also initiated, together with Russia and other states, it initiated the so-called New Development Bank, another alternative financial institution. Related to this is also a growing political global influence of China, and also China plays increasingly a military role. Its political military influence is reflected, for example, by the latest project in Latin America. It has started now to build the so-called Nicaragua Channel as an alternative to the Panama Channel. It also has another infrastructure project, building a huge railway line through whole Latin America to connect the Atlantic with the Pacific. It has also sent now a number of soldiers to South Sudan in Africa, because China has enormous foreign investments in South Sudan, oil, etc. Has sent now its soldiers to protect their investments and to play a role there. China is also increasingly active as a military power in the so-called East China Sea, as has been reflected in their claims. They are claiming the whole nearly the whole of the South China Sea as their own, which means that all the other countries which are existing there, like Vietnam, like Malaysia, like the Philippines, etc., they have no rights, no rights to access the whole sea. So all in all, China has becoming one of the biggest economic, political, and military powers.
Okay. But many leftists don't agree with this political position, but have the position that China is a semi-colonial country, subordinated to the US, or even still socialist or degenerated worker state. What do you think about these positions?
It is true, a number of organizations have published polemics against the RCIT on this question, but I think this criticism is based on, in many cases, based on ignorance. Yes, China as a capitalist system is certainly degenerated, if you want to, but certainly not a worker state. China has, as I did say before, has become the home country of the biggest number of billionaires today. Which kind of socialism is this, where you have a small minority which is becoming super rich? But it's not only the RCIT which is stating such things, but there are also various more honest Chinese scientists who openly admit this development. If you allow me to give you just a brief quote from a Chinese academic journal, which is by the official university, has been published by the official university, and they write
of China.
And they write 5% of Americans have controlled 60% of the wealth, while in China 1% of the families have controlled 41% of the wealth of the whole country, a far greater concentration than that of the United States. So even the Chinese, more honest Chinese scientists admit that the process of enrichment of the capitalists, the process of inequality has become in China even faster, even more extreme than in old capitalist countries. So there is nothing socialist, nothing worker state-like about China. Is China a semi-colony? Well, if China is a semi-colony, whose semi-colony is it? Obama's? An American semi-colony? Well, then it would be completely absurd why the United States is investing so much military and political and economic resources in order to fight against China. Why there is no need to fight against your own semi-colony? No. China is not subordinated. It's certainly true that China is economically in many areas is still weaker than the United States, no doubt about this. But it would be a very foolish understanding of the Marxist theory of imperialism if we would say that we compare every country only with the United States, and all those countries which are weaker than the United States are not imperialist countries. With such a criteria, there is no country in the world except the United States which is imperialist. But obviously this is nonsense. The whole history of capitalism has shown, and Marxists have always insisted on this, has shown that there are different types of imperialist powers. 100 years ago, we had a number of quite advanced imperialist powers, like Britain, like Germany, but also in comparison, much more backward imperialist powers, like Japan, like Russia, like the Austrian-Hungary Empire, like Italy. So there are different types, more advanced, more backward imperialist powers. Imperialist powers which are stronger on an economic level but weaker on a military level, or the other way around. What is important to understand is that we have to view a capitalist country in its totality, the economic area, the political area, the military area. We have to view it in its totality and in its relation to other countries. Is the country which is dominating other countries or which is subordinated to other imperialist powers? In the case of China, it's pretty obvious that China plays an important economic role. It is not dominated by the United States. It's becoming strong and stronger. For example, in Asian trade, it has pushed out or not pushed out, but diminished enormously the role of the United States in the last 10 years. The same with in foreign investment, etc. And China is also increasingly now playing a political and military role. And that's why you have the confrontation between China on one hand and Japan and the United States on the other hand. So if it would be a semi-colony, it would subordinate itself to these great powers. And finally, if China would be a semi-colony, the imperialist countries would have already attacked it military long time ago, like it attacked Iraq, like it attacked Afghanistan, like the British attacked Argentina in 1982, etc., etc. So China has become an imperialist great power in the late 2000s.
But many people claim that the Chinese economy is in fact dominated by Western capitalist multinational companies.
Yes, many people claim so, but they are wrong. The truth is that even if you look at economic studies on China by the World Bank or other Western institutions, they have to admit that the Chinese state or Chinese private corporations dominate in a financial sphere. The financial sector is completely dominated by Chinese banks and financial institutions. The biggest share of the private sector in China is also dominated by Chinese corporations. It is true that there are indeed a number of foreign corporations who play an important role in some areas, in some regions. But if you take the economy as a whole, it is Chinese corporations which are by clearly play the dominating role.
There have been now basically three clashes in the Chinese stock market. How do you view this?
I think these developments demonstrate a few things very clearly. First, these crashes, stock market crashes, have had enormous proportions. In a matter of a few weeks, more than $3 trillion have been liquidated in financial assets. It shows that how absurd it is to believe that China is still a degenerated worker state. We have in China, there are at least before these stock market crashes, the Chinese stock markets, the Shanghai stock market, the Shenzhen stock market, and the Hong Kong stock market. These three stock markets were amongst the 6 biggest stock markets around the world. This demonstrates that this is not a worker state, but it is home of several of the biggest stock markets of the world. First, second, what is also very, very interesting is to see how did the Western stock markets react to the stock market crashes in China. And what we have seen is that the Western stock markets became enormously nervous, and there were huge losses in New York, in London, and in other Western stock markets after the crashes in China. This shows again that China has become an imperialist power and is not a semi-colonial country. Imagine there would be a stock market crash, let me say, in Buenos Aires or in Sao Paulo or in any other semi-colonial thousand country. It is impossible that because of such a stock market crash, London or New York or Frankfurt would go down. But if China goes down, the Western stock markets go down too. This shows that the financial capitalists, very pragmatically and without any Marxist analysis, recognize that there is big capital existing in China.
Many Marxists, or so-called Marxists, argue that Lenin and Trotsky stated in their theories that only the socialist revolution can change the class character of a country, and liberate the country from imperialism. How is it possible that China got independent of imperialism?
I think there has been a combination of reasons, and one has to look concretely at the historical development of China. First, despite the bureaucratic Stalinist leadership of the Communist Party in the 1930s and 40s, despite this, there has been an enormous wave of workers and peasant struggles at this time, and it led to a bureaucratically controlled, but nevertheless a real social revolution in China in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Because of this revolution, China was able to liberate itself from the direct domination and exploitation by imperialist powers. And as a result, there has been a certain and not insignificant process of industrialization and modernization. In addition to this, the Chinese bureaucracy faced in the 1970s, later 1970s, faced a situation where their Stalinist model of economic development was in a cul-de-sac. And as a result, they started a process of certain privatization and encouragement of the private market, etc., etc. This process led to an increasing of political and social contradictions. And this culminated in June 1989 in a huge wave of workers and student protests. But it was a kind of a process of political revolution. But unfortunately, the Chinese bureaucracy succeeded in brutally smashing this uprising on the 4th of June. And I did read several accounts of participants of this struggle. It's very impressive. It was not as it was reported in the West, only a student protest, but the workers played a very important role in this. And the protests this uprising was not only limited to Beijing itself, but there were also a number of workers protests in other cities of China. But as I did say, unfortunately, the Chinese bureaucracy succeeded in killing thousands of workers and students and smashing this political revolution. This was a kind of historic defeat for the Chinese working class, and it weakened and paralyzed the Chinese working class for many years. And this enabled the Chinese bureaucracy in the early 1990s to restore capitalism and to open a conscious process of privatization, of capitalization of the state sector. There have been many millions of workers in the state sector have been sacked. And those who remained as a workforce were robbed of many rights. Basically, the Chinese state industry is a state capitalist industry. So this mechanism allow the process of an enormous capital accumulation. China has, as a result, China has become one of the biggest places in the world where capitalist accumulation has taken place. Just to give you a number, the OECD recently published a study, and it reported that while in 2003 China's share of global capital formation was 16%, this share has increased from 2003 to 2013 from 16 to 31%. It nearly doubled. So this reflects again that China has become one of the biggest capitalist countries in the world, i.e. an imperialist power. But it also reflects that as the process of capitalization has very deep roots in China. Finally, the Chinese bureaucracy made the process of restoration of capitalism. For this they did choose a very different path from what the Russian bureaucracy did, and they combined the capitalist restoration on the economic level with a continuation of the political rule of the Communist Party. So in effect we can speak today about the Stalinist capitalist dictatorship in China. And this combination of a continuation of the dictatorship, a brutal suppression of the working class, and a capitalist process on the economic sphere, this combination certainly went to the big advantage of China in order to emerge as an imperialist power. Finally, I would like also to add that there is also a very specific process going on in China concerning the exploitation of the working class. In opposite to many other countries, the Chinese workers do not have the right to leave on their own their region and to work and to live in another region. As a result of this, there are hundreds of millions of workers. They are called, not accidentally, they are called migrants in China, who are working and living outside of their native region. And because of this, they are living and working in other regions, usually in big cities, without having social rights, without having legal rights. And as a result, they are super exploited as a cheap labor force. And this is an important source for Chinese capitalists to increase their profits, and it is another important factor which helped the Chinese bourgeoisie to become an imperialist bourgeoisie.
Okay. And what do you want to answer to those people who claim that Lenin and Trotsky stated that, who say that Lenin and Trotsky say that nation cannot change its class character without a successful socialist revolution?
I would advise these people to reread again what Lenin and Trotsky actually did say in reality. Lenin, for example, in his book on imperialism, explicitly mentioned the possibilities that countries from the colonial world, under exceptional circumstances, can become an imperialist power. He named Japan as an example for this. Trotsky, in his work on the permanent revolution, did insist that if we look at the totality of the tasks of the democratic revolution, national independence, overcoming the semi-feudal relations in the agrarian sector, the struggle against dictatorship, etc., etc., that as a general law, all these tasks in their totality can only be overcome by a successful socialist proletarian revolution. This, however, does not exclude, and Trotsky never did say so, this does not exclude the possibility that in this or that area a country of a semi-colonial country under exceptional circumstances can overcome and can solve this or that individual issue. A few examples. Marxists were always clear that, for example, in Japan, there was, still in the 1930s, and of course even more before, there were still strong semi-feudal relations in the agrarian sector. Or in Germany, you had for a long time a semi-absolutist monarchist state apparatus. But as we know, today there is no absolutist monarchist state apparatus in Germany anymore, and in Japan certainly there are no semi-feudal agrarian relations. No person with any sense would claim so. But and this was surprisingly possible without a successful proletarian socialist revolution. So it would be a completely wrong and dogmatist in a worst sense of the word interpretation of Trotsky theory of permanent revolution if we would exclude the possibility that one or the other countries under exceptional circumstances can solve one or the other features of backwardness without a socialist proletarian revolution. What we insist on as Trotskyists is all these features in their totality in its general development, and for the most cases of in most countries of the world, they can overcome these forms of backward capitalist oppression and exploitation only via a successful proletarian socialist revolution.
What do you think does this theoretical analysis of China's class character mean in practice for revolutionaries and socialist workers in China or internationally?
I think there are several consequences. First, in China itself, it's very important for revolutionaries to support and to help the working class in organizing and advancing its struggle against the exploitation, against the political oppression. There are quite good opportunities, despite the difficult circumstances of the dictatorship. There have been very important developments in the recent past. Since 2011, the number of strikes and workers' protests have doubled every year. So we have an enormous increase of workers' resistance against the capitalist exploitation.
Yes.
By the way, another example why China can hardly be a worker state if the working class is struggling so hard against the capitalist exploitation. So there are good opportunities for revolutionaries to organize the already existing in spreading workers' struggle. Of course, there are many not only the difficulty of the political oppression by the state capitalist dictatorship, but also we have, of course, to be aware that currently, at the moment, most workers' protests are limited to economic issues, and it's very important that revolutionaries support these economic struggles, but try to combine them with political demands. The struggle for democratic rights, the struggle to defend the oppressed nations in China. Another feature of China's capitalist and imperialist country is the enormous national oppression of its national minorities. The Chinese regime is encouraging and pushing strongly Han chauvinism and oppresses brutally, for example, the Muslim people, the Uyghurs in Chinese Turkestan, in the west of the country. Revolutionaries have to support the national liberation struggle of the Uyghur people. And have to support their struggle for the right of national self-determination. If they want to become independent, Chinese revolutionaries should support this. They should defend it against increasing colonialization. The Chinese regime is consciously encouraging the settlement of Han Chinese in Chinese Turkestan in order to make the Uyghurs a minority in their own country, in their own region. So revolutionaries should support this, and they should support the struggle for democratic rights. They should support, they should combine the struggle with the perspective to bring down the Stalinist capitalist dictatorship. So it will be important to fight for the right of workers to have their independent trade unions, to have their independent parties, to assemble on the street and to demonstrate when they like, to have public meetings, to have their own press, to have their own media. So these are certainly very important issues for revolutionaries under the current circumstances. Will be the struggle against the chauvinism, against Chinese militarism. As I did say before, the Chinese regime is trying to dominate smaller countries in the region, like Vietnam, like Malaysia, and etc. Chinese revolutionaries should oppose Chinese expansionism, and they should defend countries like Vietnam against China's expansionism. Such a perspective of internationalism, such a perspective for fighting for democratic rights, fighting for economic rights, has to be combined with a perspective of the socialist revolution. The Chinese revolutionaries combine all these demands with a perspective for a really red, a really socialist China, where the working class and the poor peasants take out the power of the hands of the Chinese and foreign capitalists, bring down the so-called Communist Party, and create a workers and poor republic, where the power is in the hands of the working class, not anymore of the capitalists and the bureaucrats. I think revolutionaries internationally have to support the Chinese workers in this struggle. And at the same time, however, of course, revolutionaries for example, in Western imperialist countries, they have also to fight strongly against their own imperialist aggression.
Yes.
We oppose Chinese imperialism, but we oppose in the same way, and not less, American imperialism and European imperialism and Japanese imperialism. The perspective for real revolutionaries today is to fight against all great powers, be it the United States, be it the European Union, China, Russia, or Japan. And we combine such a perspective of anti-imperialist struggle with a struggle for international socialist revolution. Revolutionaries should oppose any imperialist interference in semi-colonial countries, be it by the United States, be it by China, by the European Union. No great power, no imperialist power has the right to dominate semi-colonial countries, and revolutionaries in all countries of the world should support the oppressed people in their resistance against the great powers.